Welcome back to Protestant Bros, and today we're going to do some biblical typology. And we're going to look at the life of Moses to see how he was a type of him to come. Starting with Hebrews chapter 3. Therefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our confession, Christ Jesus, who was faithful to him who appointed him, as Moses also was faithful in all his house. For this one has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, inasmuch as he who built the house has more honor than the house. For every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. And Moses indeed was faithful in all his house as a servant, for a testimony of those things which would be spoken afterward. But Christ, as a son over his own house, whose house we are if we hold fast the confidence and the rejoicing of the hope firm to the end. So to start, let's just look at Moses' life and see if we could connect the themes with Jesus' life and ministry. So starting with Exodus chapter 1, we're introduced to a new Pharaoh, the new king of Egypt, who he didn't know Joseph. He decided that he was going to enslave the Israelites. When we go down to verse 22. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. So immediately in the first chapter, we're introduced to a king who decided to order the massacre of infants. Then in Exodus chapter 2, we're introduced to an Israelite couple who decides that they're not going to listen to Pharaoh and that they're going to save their child. Eventually the child becomes too old for them to hide, so they put the child in a basket and let the basket drift down the river. Eventually the basket comes to the daughter of Pharaoh, and as we're told in chapter 2, verse 5. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him, and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then when we jump down to verse 10, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. So here we have a child who is adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter, and presumably doesn't seem like she has any children. So it wouldn't be a stretch to say that she was possibly a virgin. We have a virgin who has a son. And she calls him Moses, meaning drawn from the water. If we go to Acts chapter 7, verse 22. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds. In verse 23, now when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. Now we go back to Exodus chapter 2. We're told when Moses decided to go visit his brethren. In verse 11, now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And we jump down to verse 15. When Pharaoh heard this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. And again, if we go back to Acts chapter 7, verse 29. Then at this saying Moses fled and became a dweller in the land of Midian, where he had 2 sons. And when 40 years had passed, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire in a bush, in the wilderness of Mount Sinai. So Moses is dwelling in the wilderness for 40 years. When Moses returns back to Egypt, he performs all kinds of signs and wonders. Now when we go to Exodus chapter 12, verse 29. And it came to pass at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat at his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of livestock. So Pharaoh rose in the night, he, all his servants, and all the Egyptians. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. Then he called for Moses and Aaron by night, and said, rise, go out from among my people, both you and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as you have said. Also take your flocks and your herds, as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also. So here it was the death of the firstborn after Passover that made Pharaoh free the Israelites. Then when we go to Exodus chapter 14, I think everybody's pretty much familiar with this event. And we start at verse 21. That Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. All right, and I'm going to stop there for now with Moses' story, because I want to show how this relates to the events that we see in the gospel.